So my favorite sumo in those days was a fellow named Mai no Umi. But he was still skinny, like 100 kilograms.
Right.
And Mai no Umi came to be known as Waza no Depato, the department store of techniques. If they want to win against these very large players, including from China, they have to go on a diet. They have to become fast and nimble, and they have to become the Waza no Depato. So, which I call aggregate niche strategy, but it's.
So in your book, but you argue that Japan can, re-innovate. So what do you think about, fax machines, and what do you think about the current status of Japan?
But the Japanese economy has evolved, right? So in the 1980s and 90s, Japan was known for making very high-end, high-quality consumer gadgets.
Right.
Whether that was the television and Sony, and the kitchen, there were lots of, Japanese items. The camcorder, the Walkman, of course, right? And those were the days when the world fell in love with, Japanese products. And then came the bubble economy, and so and the companies were incentivized at the time to turn into these very large conglomerates. So, for example, you may know that Hitachi at some point had over 1,000 subsidiaries, and they were making everything from oven toaster to nuclear power plant.
Yes.
Right, and hard disk drives and I don't know, vacuum cleaners and Shinkansen and for medical devices and construction machinery. And why did they do that? Because in those days, the Japanese government and industrial policy rewarded size. And size was measured in sales. And so if you were a CEO of a very large Japanese company in those days, you would have done your best to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and diversify. The bigger, the better. And that worked fine. And then the bubble economy made it worse, right? So Nippon Steel went into semiconductors, completely unrelated diversification. And I like to think about this. I was reminded of the old sumo of the 1980s. I don't know whether you remember Konishiki.
Oh, Konishiki, the big.
He was.
Hawaii,
Exactly. He was something like 190 centimeters and 350 kilograms or something, right? And that was sort of the image of Japan of the 1980s. These very large companies. Well, and then of course came the rise of China. And the reality just is that no matter how large the largest Japanese company, it'll never be as large as China. Right? So my favorite sumo in those days was a fellow named Mai no Umi. Do you remember him?
Yes.
Mai no Umi still is, he's Genki de. So he was a little shorter than I am, so 172 centimeters. And he had to actually put some silicone under his scalp.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the minimum size for the sumo kyokai was 173. So he made himself a little taller. But he was still skinny, like 100 kilograms.
Right.
And Mai no Umi came to be known as Waza no Depato, the department store of techniques. In those days, it was great, right? I think today there's Enho, who's a little bit similar.
Similar, yes.
I thought in the old days there was Anyway, so Mai no Umi, for me, is a great image of this reinvention of Japan's largest companies. If they want to win against these very large players, including from China, they have to go on a diet. They have to become fast and nimble, and they have to become the Waza no Depato. So master the techniques that the others don't have, so that they can outsmart the competitors, and then thereby anchor the supply chains in Northeast Asia. So what I've seen happening is that Japan's best companies have done this. They have adopted this, Mai no Umi strategy, which I call aggregate niche strategy. But it's a similar thing, like going out of commoditized markets or markets where they can't win, upstream or downstream into very deep tech places that require breakthrough innovation, for instance, fine chemicals for electronics, and compete there as leaders in these markets.
Interesting. Could you give some example of a company that are taking my know me strategy?
Yeah. So Hitachi, actually, I just mentioned, right?
Hitachi,
That's what they're doing right now. They're in the middle of this diet, right? So Hitachi has sold off a lot of these places, even though some of them were very profitable.
Right.
Have decided that this is sort of a choose and focus, sentaku to
Sentaku
version 2.0. So rather than just selling things off, they're very strategically, okay, what kind of company do we want to be? What is our core competence? How can we extend this core competence into new businesses that will make us great competitors in the digital transformation?
I see.
Right, and the Hitachi vision is to run our smart cities and organize everything around that. Other companies have decided that they would go. So, for instance, the chemical companies. Japan used to have these big chemical players. And that's a commoditized market. It's important. It's still important, and it's important as a knowledge base to extend into new markets. But the leadership I see is in fine chemicals for electronics. So if you are looking at any screen right now, whether this screen or this screen or this screen, if that screen is any good, meaning you can look at it from an angle, or the black is really black, if it's really good, the polarizer and the brightness film are from Japan. And they're very high quality. They're very expensive. That's why you paid so much for your good Keitai. And so there's no Japan Inside label on your computer, right? It might say Intel Inside, but it doesn't say Japan Inside. But the reality is there are so many parts of the global supply chains that are dominated by Japanese companies that without Japanese input products, we probably couldn't get through the day.
Interesting.
There are so many things in our daily life. Your car, your electronics, if you have an electric bicycle, maybe, right? And so the toothbrush, I don't know, and it's the important part. So it might be an adhesive that goes into the semiconductor that goes into the car, right? Or the little motor that in your car makes the windows come down or the wipers go this way. So it's hidden. And because it doesn't say Japan Inside, people don't know. And so they say, well, Japan is dead. And some of you mentioned negativity. So when I come to Japan and people tell me, oh, it's so bad, 30 years of slow growth and the government debt and the productivity and the regions and the aging and that's true.
Yes.
It's true.
It's true.
It's true. If you're interested in this, you can go to the bookstore. There are lots of books.
Yes.
So then we have a puzzle though, because Japan is only the 11th largest country in the world, and it is still the third largest economy in the world.
Yes.
After 30 years of bad news from Japan, the reality is Japan is still the third largest economy in the world. So what I was trying to answer with this book is, how can that be? Something has to be working. But it can't be that everything is bad. Yes, there's a lot bad. There's a lot bad in every country.
Yes.
I mean, the U.S. certainly we could buy, right? In Europe, but why always only look at the bad things? Let's look at what's working. And the companies that are really good in Japan right now, they're really good because they have to overcome the regulation and all of these bad things and stagnation and so forth. So I decided to write a book about the leading companies, not the bad companies.
Not the bad. After publishing your book, so do scholars or readers agree with you? Because still there's always negative news about Japan. Weak yen, inflation, very low work wage. Do people agree with you, or what are the reactions you got from?
Yeah, I had a lot of pushback, and I think the current situation in Japan is some sort of expression of the 2080 principle. Have you heard of it? It's
Yes.
like 20% of your effort explains 80% of your effective output in a given day, or 20% of a customer of a Keitai company or so, account for 80% of revenue. I think the Japanese economy might be something like that, where a small portion of companies, whether that's 20% or 10%, I don't know.
Always doing good and
explain 80% of the economic activity. Right? And so it's really a question. Yes, for every great company that I know, you probably know 4 companies that could be better, or they're not raising their wages. But the companies that I'm looking at, there's a lot of tenshoku, right? So there's a lot of mobility. Labor now has power, right? So the labor shortage empowers employees. Wages are rising. So it depends really on what you look at and what you choose to study.
Okay. Any examples?
Yeah. So I have a number of examples in the book, but you could just open the Nikkei, right? So the AGC, NEC have announced that they're raising their wages for the young employees, and the chemical companies that I'm particularly interested in are. They need engineers, and yes, they will be willing to make sure that people are, taken care of and come work for that company and happily come work for that company. And that's driving a lot of change now.
Yeah. Do you mean like Uniqlo, or in your book you mentioned about Recruit, Key&, SoftBank, Bridgestone, Asahi Glass? Are those companies?
Yeah, and some of them are companies where you would say, really? Yeah. Recruit, everybody knows, right? So I mean, that's a special case. Key&'s might be a little bit crazy almost, right? Or so people say, right? Yeah, there are jokes about that high wage, but it's not just the high wage, right? I mean, so places like Fanuc and Key&'s and so forth are setting themselves up as springboards. Recruit too, right? So you go there, you work really, really hard for 5 or 7 years or so. You can start your own company, or you can become an advisor to other companies. So that's very attractive. So those companies are attracting talent by saying, "Come here, we'll teach you something. You can make some mistakes, on our money, and then you can go out. And by the way, we will still keep you in our orbit.
Good relationship.
So let's keep you, because if you're not successful, for bad luck strikes or something, just come back, right? And that's very powerful. But it doesn't have to be just those new companies. Right? So some of the old companies that you might think of as
old companies,
JTC, or Japan Traditional Companies, Showa
companies
are also quietly doing these transformations.
Interesting.
Yeah. So JSR. Was founded in the 1950s as Japan Synthetic Rubber. And it was one of these big yokaichi,
very traditional,
stinky, chemical, whatever. And then, they did what they were founded to do, and then they actually pivoted in the 80s into semiconductor materials and other chemical materials. And just recently, they actually sold off the traditional business. Their name is still JSR. They look like a chemical company, right? But if you go there, it's a specialty place. It's very specialized, very choose and focus, next generation chemicals. So sometimes it's even difficult to see, even if you know the companies. Fuji Photo Film.
Yes.
It's no longer Fuji Photo Film, right? They're now Fujifilm. It's a great story of a pivot where with the base foot, they're still a surface chemistry company.
Yes.
But they've gone out of photo into these other new extensions. Right. And the reason that works is what I call this aggregate niche strategy. So there's a slide that you can see. It looks like a bubble slide. I call it a bubble slide, and it's actually something that METI did together with NEDO. They were interested in Japan's role in global supply chains. So they picked I don't know how, 931 product categories. It's not an academic study. These were not randomly, So let's look at electronics. Let's look at car parts. Let's look at, input materials, batteries, robots. So they, put together a whole array of things, and they found that in 478 or so of these industries that they were studying, Japanese companies combined to a market share of over 50%.
Wow.
And that's important also in terms of economic security and so forth. So we have these input parts or input materials where Japanese companies are a force. And each of these industries is fairly small. Okay? Maybe $5 billion global market dollars, $5 billion. That's whatever that is, 500 something, not quite the exchange rate, well, whatever. So 50% of that, give or take, let's make the math easy, $2 billion of sales every year, right? But that, you would say, that's tiny. I mean, in global trade, that's a small number. So that's a niche. But in the aggregate, if you have 1 plus 1 plus 1, if you have 478 of those, that's large.
Oh, you mean a group of
in
niches?
The aggregate.
I see.
So we translate this as shugo niche because
Shugo
it
niche.
adds up, right? So the layer after layer after layer of bubbles. And what's interesting about this is that other countries don't have these bubbles in the same way. So if you look at that same chart for South Korea, they of course have
Samsung,
cars from Samsung
LG,
and LG,
yes.
but none of these niches. It's a
interesting.
blue ocean there. You look at the United States, they do in biotech and semiconductor technologies, right? But nobody has a similar Milky Way as Japan does. And it's a recent thing. So in 2006, there weren't that many bubbles. But in 2016, a lot of bubbles had accumulated. And the reason is that these large companies were doing this choose and focus and were saying, okay, we are good at this type of chemistry, or we are good at this type of construction machinery, or we're good at this type of, and let's extend it into these niches where we have few competitors and where our input part is absolutely critical. And then you can charge a higher price.
I see. So let me be clear, ask about niche. Because do you mean that niche means hidden champions? Because it seems that we cannot be a Konishiki. We have to only become Mainomi. Do you mean that? Or?
Yeah, So Mainomi, I think, is much more powerful.
Powerful I like Mainomi,
because Konishki's got to be out of the ring.
But we also want to be Konishiki or Google or Apple.
Yeah, so that's the Daikigyo, right? That Japan still has. And in the old days, it was understandable, right? Because being a salaryman at a large firm, it's a status, and that's great. But I think the times have changed. But no, I am not talking about hidden champions. The hidden champion story is something that I think Meti was pushing to highlight small firms, and they have some sort of neji or something, some screw.
There was all these novel movies.
Oh yeah, Hanza Manoki, it's like neji, right? Or it's always this neji
It's like
thing.
weak competing against strong.
Exactly, and no, this is not such a story.
Okay.
The niches are small, but the competitors that are in these niches are huge. Right, they're listed companies, multi-billion-dollar sales every year. They line these. They have several of these. So there are two dimensions to this aggregate niche. The one is that one company occupies several. Right, so JSR has like 4 or 5.
Yes.
Other chemical companies, the same thing. So they're very good at this one thing. So for instance, there's a film on glasses, and Mitsui Chemicals has like over 50% world market share in this film. Now you might think, is that a big thing? Yeah, there are lots of people that have glasses, right? And there are lots of people that are so desperate that they can see well that they are willing to spend money on this. So yes, it's a thing. Similar sort of coating on the back of your cell phone, there's a camera lens, right? Yeah, there's a code on top of that. Same thing.
Yeah.
And but it's a very large company that makes that.
So it's not like a small family-owned factory.
No,
Okay.
no, these are
Huge
big
companies,
places.
but concentrating on niche.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the second dimension is that several Japanese companies occupy one niche. So, for instance, in photoresist, which is a highly volatile chemical soup, it's corrosive and toxic, and you don't want to touch it, right? It's very, very, very difficult to make with no variance. It's really very deep tech. And there are 3 Japanese companies that combine to something like 93% of world market share. Right? And so that's great for Japan.
So do you think such a niche company can like create innovation? Because when we talk about innovation, we tend to think about Google, Facebook, or Tesla, or Spotify. Those big companies that are changing the world. Instead of hidden Japan, or do you think that they can change the world and make innovation?
Oh, they are.
They are.
They are. It's so there's this idea that innovation has to be done by small firms, and so
like a guy working in a Silicon Valley.
So if you think about there are actually so large companies have everything that small companies need. Large companies have the money. They have the people, the talent. And they have the assets. They have an R&D thing. They have machinery. They have a plant, right? So large companies can be really, really good at innovation because they have everything that a startup needs. The startups have something that large companies don't have. They have no baggage, basically, right? So they're unencumbered by politics. They can just go out, do it. They're fast. They're even faster than Mainomi, right? So they're a mini Mainomi. So they're fast. They can just they see a problem and fix it, or they see a gap and fill it, or they see a bad solution and make a better solution, right? And like that, they can do that.
Yes.
But they need money from somewhere, and they need people from somewhere. Large companies often have a problem with sensing, right? So they may not see the problem, or they have some internal challenge that they see the problem and they have a solution, but the existing business doesn't like this, right? So large companies have their own issues. So one of the things that would be great is if they, could create synergies and co-create more innovation. But that's a whole different challenge, I guess. Yeah.
So our publication PIVOT and also the government is trying to encourage more startups and more people to start their own company or so on. Do you think that strategy is the correct path, or do you think we should keep the aggregate niche strategy as it is?
Oh, all of the above.
All of the above.
So, so the aggregate niche is the innovative strategy of Japan's best companies. Let's celebrate it.
Yes.
Right? It's great.
It's great.
The co-creation can come in when these large companies use their exploit business to explore. Right? So Ryokiki and the Dexter's organization. Where do these new ideas come from? Well, why don't we ask the startups, right? So there's a possibility there that large firms, which they do, right, create these corporate venture capital funds. They go out with open innovation. They go out into the market and say, "Oh, these people have a great idea. Let's get that." Buy it or collaborate or something, and that's great. It requires that there are startup companies that have great ideas, right? And it requires large companies to be open to that. At the same time, there could be, the Japanese innovation ecosystem also needs just startups that are not working with large firms, right? So that do their own thing. The government can set the playing field, right, as it has, right? So it started in the late 90s. There was this deregulation. Then came the 1 yen company. Then came the what were they called? The Chusho Kigyo Ikse Kiko, right? So the SBICs.
Yes.
And the first one was in Shibuya, which is why Shibuya is now, right? And I think that was all great. Maybe the government doesn't have to do more than that, right? Yeah, make some funds available, have some ideas, create demand, right? Ask for something. So if you, I don't know whether you're aware, but the Silicon Valley actually started because the U.S. government decided to go to the moon.
Yes.
That's just creating demand. Right? So I think the best thing the government can do is create demand for new ideas.
So in what way can the Japanese government create demand? Because unlike the United States, the Japanese government is not, the defense fee and also about the going to the moon is not similar in the Japanese situation. What kind of demand can the Japanese government create?
Well, the digital transformation gives a perfect on a silver platter. It's a perfect opportunity, right? We want smart cities. I would just, if I were the government, I would just go with smart city, because that's open. Digital manufacturing. But the government doesn't have to do that, actually. The cities could do the smart city infrastructure investments, right? So announce, a certain investment plan and have everybody bid. But that's not, you're right. That's not what the Japanese government has historically done, I think.
Yeah. So I'd like to wrap up. So could you give us some final comments how Japan can business re-innovation cycle? Yeah.
Well, I think that it's happening, and there's some external pressures. So there's the rise of China that took away what Japan used to do, with a lower cost. There is the digital transformation. There are sort of pandemics and wars. So there's a lot of external stuff that's actually a threat, but as I said earlier, a threat is an opportunity. So look at those and think, well, how can we make money out of this, or how can we grow within this, right? And then domestically, of course, there's the labor shortage, which is a really lucky moment, I think, that coincides with the DX. So there will be a lot of room for startup companies to come up with great innovative ideas, work with large companies. Large company employees can maybe go and visit, work with startups. And so I see a very interesting period ahead of Japan, where I think a lot of things will change from what we thought it was maybe only 5-10 years ago.
はい、ありがとうございました。カリフォルニア大学サンディエゴ校の売家シェーデ教授でした。本当に日本の文化をちょっと見直して、ネガティブなことばっかり言うのやめようって思いました。どうもありがとうございました。Thank you for joining.
ありがとうございます。Thank you.